So welcome. So that's me, Industry Partnership Lead, a very old photo, I don't know. Keep looking. So I'm the Industry Partnership Lead at the Innovation Observatory, and I also work for the Research Support Service that helps with I4I applications, so the research side of that as well. So I've got a dual role. So welcome. Our next event in July is, so these are monthly events. So as said, this is the 12th, so the 13th is Horizon Scanning Globally. So we'll be looking at keynotes from the Department for Business and Trade. So what's going on internationally, any international conferences that might be of use, etc. And then we're hoping to have plug and play the health program within that. So they've got 61 centres globally, and look at what's happening in terms of investment, venture capitalists, etc. Globally. And then we're going to have a small business talk about their global experience. So what they've done from a global angle in terms of funding, events, conferences, attracting funding, etc., from a global point of view. So as said, that's the normal itinerary. So we'll be going into the keynotes. And yeah, if anyone hasn't put their names down for one-to-one and they want a one-to-one, just flag it, please, and we'll accommodate that. So in terms of industry resources, for the Innovation Observatory, there's some really useful links here. So the website page is there. So on that, there are a number of reports, dashboards, and technology briefings that are of value to industry. So for example, there's AI in health tech, there's neurotech report as well. So they're definitely worth a look at. And personally, if I was putting in an application or I was looking for funding, then I would go to the reports and pull out any bits of evidence in terms of market assessment, competitor analysis, and any potential gaps in the market. So those resources on the website are public facing. There are obviously some confidential ones that aren't public facing, but there are a number of public facing reports that are of value and interest. So yeah, that's the web page. So I'm now going to hand over to Eugenie. So we're just going to, I'll go back to Dora's in a minute. Oh, there's Eugenie. And then we'll skip back to Dora's. Sorry about that. Welcome, Eugenie.
Hi everyone, my name is Eugenie Evelyn Johnson. I'm a research assistant at the NIHR Innovation Observatory. I work mostly in evidence synthesis, so doing systematic reviews and other types of reviews. But I'm also really passionate about patient and public involvement. And today I'm going to talk a bit about a framework that I helped to co-develop and that was launched in March of this year. Called Rapid Involvement of Patients and the Public in Evidence Synthesis, or RIPPLES for short. But I'm going to talk about it specifically in the context of how SMEs might be able to adapt this, specifically in the context of grant applications and funding. So these are just the acknowledgements and disclosures from the NIHR Innovation Observatory. And I do want to foreground this with a little bit of caution. Ripples wasn't really designed with SMEs in mind or what they do. It was developed in terms of evidence synthesis and rapid evidence synthesis. However, a lot of its foundational principles and a lot of the things that we use to guide this on is very relevant regardless of what context you're putting it into. So I'm going to kind of highlight that. I'm going to show you how it can be adapted. And this is the framework. and it gives you a high-level overview of what's in it. So we have underpinning principles, ideas in the middle to go through how you can foster ongoing relationships with communities and networks. And then the outer layer is how you actually work with people in practice, either through planning, grants and projects, or in the actual projects themselves. And I've deliberately greyed out the part that says rapid evidence synthesis here, because that is the part that is probably least relevant to SMEs. But as we'll see, I'm going to adapt that a little bit later on. Ooh. So alongside Ripples, you don't just have this to work off. We also developed a really detailed guidance document that has a lot of links to outside resources, such as ones that I'm going to show going through this presentation, and also a worksheet to help plan patient and public involvement too. So there's lots of linked resources to do with Ripples. So without further ado, I'm going to go through each of these different layers and how you might use them to think about involving patients and members of the public as SMEs. So the underlying principles that surround Ripples is really about the UK standards for public involvement. And these should be foundational really to any PPI that we do, whether it's research, what you do as SMEs. So these are the 6 principles. So inclusive opportunities, working together, communication, impact, support and training, and governance. So inclusive opportunities, I won't delve too much into because Dora, our next speaker, is going to talk about that a little bit more. Working together is all about how we support each other to work together as patients in the public, researchers and SMEs in the projects that we do and how we can facilitate that. Excuse me. Communication, it's all about using plain language to help explain ideas. It's also about the methods of communication that we use with patients and the public as well. So, for example, do people like to have meetings, phone calls, emails, and really thinking about how they like to be communicated with in that sense. And also keeping in touch with people as well to let them know what's going on with projects. Governance, so ensuring that there are proper mechanisms to remunerate people for their time being involved in projects, but also ensuring that patients and the public have a presence in what you're doing and can actually govern as part of the research team and bring that perspective throughout and avoiding what we might call tokenism. Support and training, so that can be for patients and the public to understand more about what you do as SMEs, but also support and training for people within SMEs as well to understand more about how to work with patients and the public. And then we have impact, which is much more about communicating how working with patients and the public has actually improved or potentially changed the work, or how their ideas and perspectives have been built in to what you're doing. So the UK Standards for Public Involvement is a really interesting and really good website in a way because it gives you a lot of pointers as to how to implement all of these different aspects. So it doesn't just give you these and set you away. It does give you some ideas about how you can put these into practice, which is very helpful. Oh, so moving on to this second layer. So first we have fostering ongoing relationships with communities and networks. So this is all about ensuring that you're not just kind of going to people at one time and going, hey, do you want to be involved? This is about really kind of like developing relationships and trusted relationships with people over time and making sure that they understand you and you understand them so that you can really draw on them later on and you can have that mutually respectful conversations. And again, trying to avoid that kind of tokenism. So here, this is some advice from the NIHR's I4I application guidance. And it says that you should include a named person with appropriate skill and experience responsible for working with the people and communities during the project, which should be adequately costed and resourced. And this type of role can really help you to ensure that you're involving and engaging people over time. So you're not just, you have someone actually specific who can do that for you and who is that trusted point of contact. And that can be really helpful with establishing these relationships. And there's lots of toolkits as well that can help with doing this as well. So I've just picked out one, which is the Applied Research Collaborative North Sea North Cumbria Community Engagement Toolkit. But there's lots and lots of different ones that can help you to embed that kind of community networking in there. Second, training and support for researchers, but also for patients and the public. So I've touched on this a little bit when talking about the UK standards for public involvement. But there's lots of places you can go if people are unsure of where to go for training. And the one that probably stands out the most in my mind is the NIHR's Learning for Involvement. They have really good resources on getting started in public involvement for patients of the public, but also for people who are really getting started in PPIE as well and want to know a bit more about how to involve people. So they have lots of different training modules, but they also have a lot of case studies and lots of different resources and frameworks that you can look through on their website as well. So that can be really useful. And then finally, we have establishing reimbursement mechanisms. So this is all about making sure that people can be remunerated properly for their time. So again, the NIHR have really detailed guidance about this. This is an example of it, the payment guidance for researchers and professionals. But there's also one that's specifically aimed at the public, which tells them a little bit more about what they can expect from remuneration and what potential implications that has. So as an SME, you might need to think about how you're actually going to set up paying patients in the public. And that could be through things like vouchers from different retailers, potentially back payments. But sometimes if you're talking to people, they might want an alternative form of remuneration. So that could be, for example, some other form of recognition that they've actually worked on a project. So like a certificate or a letter saying, yes, this person helped us to design this product or helped us develop it. So it's all about just finding out what people want and making sure that they can have their preferences. And something else that I would say about this as well is that if you're going for a grant application and you're budgeting for PPIE, make sure that you budget properly with this guidance as well, and try to put a little bit of flexibility in it as well. You don't want to be finding that you can't actually remunerate people effectively, and that you actually need to have more meetings potentially than you thought, or you need to do some follow-ups. So it's always quite good to put in a little bit of flex as well. So moving on to the outer layer, which is kind of where you're actually doing your grant proposal itself or actually doing a project. And the first point of these is about finding the right people to involve. So it's all good and well, like involving people, but you have to make sure that you're targeting the right people and also being inclusive about that. So I've got some more guidance from the NIHR here on this topic. So particularly their guidance for applicants on working with people and communities. So when you're thinking about grant applications, it's always good to think about who will be involved, but also why they're involved. And how relevant people in the communities have been involved in and have shaped the proposal so far. So again, it's not just about thinking about what they're going to do in the actual project itself. It's about how they've shaped your proposal and how they've been involved up until that point. And again, who's involved in developing that application and why, and who will be involved throughout the life cycle of your project and why this is appropriate. So again, really thinking about who are the best people to be involved in what you're doing as SMEs, and also how they're going to involve them throughout everything that you're doing in your project. So not just the beginning and the end, so not just involving them in the planning and then telling them what you did later on, but also how you're going to make sure that their involvement is continual throughout the life cycle of what you're doing. So this part says planning the review, but we'll call it planning the project, product development, anything else. So this is really the nuts and bolts of how you're actually going to think about how are we going to involve people. And again, the NIHR says that you have to ensure that different stages of your research lifecycle are directly shaped and influenced by the relevant lived experience and needs of diverse people and communities who will be affected by it. So this is all about how are you going to ensure that people are involved throughout what you're doing and that is also going to be done meaningfully. How will you ensure equitable partnerships with people and communities? And Dora's going to talk a bit more about equity in a bit. And how you will appropriately engage, support, and reward those involved. So going back to those establishing reimbursement mechanisms, how are you going to make sure that they're rewarded for their time, recognised for their time, and how you're going to communicate that to them? And that might involve a bit of expectation setting as well. So really talking to them in the beginning and asking them, how would you like to be recognised? And this is a piece of guidance from the EME NICE programme from the NIHR as well. So applications should be co-produced, demonstrating an equal partnership with service commissioners, providers, and service users. So this really shows you that, as well as you kind of involving a big, broad range of interest holders here. So it might be working with other companies, policymakers, but also thinking about patients and the public. So just wanted to pop that in there as well, an example. So here's where I've cheekily adapted the framework a little bit to say the project. And this is basically about how you're going to continue doing public involvement throughout the work that you're doing. So again, this has to be directly shaped and influenced by relevant lived experience. I think the key word here is relevant. Going back to finding the right people to be involved. And it needs to be diverse people and communities who will be affected by it as well. So it needs to be inclusive and it needs to be equitable. Finally, impact and sharing. So this is about how you're going to communicate how patients and the public have actually influenced your work and what's actually come out of it. So you need to be kind of saying about how the work will make a difference for those involved, to the research, what you're doing as SMEs, and also how you evaluate this, report on it, and share the learning. So as I said before, the Ripples guidance document goes into a lot more detail about all of these different layers. It also includes a great deal of links and different other links out to other resources that were really helpful in each of the different areas. There are parts that obviously might not be as relevant to yourselves. But in general, that can be a really, really good starting point and for thinking about all of these different aspects and about building on those as well and ensuring that you're doing things inclusively and equitably. And the worksheet can also help you plan through this as well. So if you're not sure where to start, you're not sure who to involve, there are questions on here that can help you think about who would be best to involve, how you can set expectations with the people who are being involved. There are obviously some questions in here that were not designed with SMEs in mind, but it does give you a good idea of how you should be thinking about planning your involvement and who you're going to involve as well. So in terms of just other potentially useful resources, there's the guidance for applicants on working with people and communities, which I've drawn on a lot during this presentation. And I think the NAHR's stories website is really interesting as well. You can filter specifically by industry. And it gives you a lot of different examples of how people in SMEs and industry have worked with patients and the public in the past. So if you're looking for a little bit of inspiration, that might be really, really helpful. And finally, I would really recommend going to a research support service. They can help guide you in how to engage with patients and the public effectively, and really give you some tailored one-to-one advice on that as well. So if you're interested in Ripples, it's on the NIHR Innovation Observatory website. I have included a QR code, but I know that the presentation will be sent around as well. It's absolutely free. All the resources are free. You just need to pop in a couple of details in the download form, and then it's free to use and have a look at as you may see fit. So yeah, that was a whistle-stop tour of how Ripples could potentially be adapted for the work that SMEs do. And if you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to get in touch or ask on the panel as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Eugenie. That was really helpful. So as Eugenie mentioned, any questions, we'll take it on the panel fireside chat. So store them up and close your eyes while I just rewind. Not the click-throughs. Yeah. There we go. And I'm just going to hand over to Dora, who's going to cover inclusivity. So thank you, Dora.
Hey everyone, my name is Dora Gazic. I work at the methodologist at the NIHR Research Support Service, which Eugenie mentioned just at the end of her presentation. And today I will talk about research inclusion, and I will give you a case study on the project that I worked with prior to being here on LGBTQ+ social care assessments. So starting with research inclusion, why do we need it and what it is? So research inclusion is now a requirement for funding by the NIHR from November last year. And there are several points here that I think capture quite nicely why we need research inclusion and why it's important. So by being inclusive in research, we improve scientific rigor by increasing the accuracy, translatability, and reproducibility of research. Because by using a diverse sample, we reflect real life situations and real world diversity and reduce the chance of bias. We ensure patient safety, care, and health outcomes. So for example, if we have a treatment or intervention that is useful for one group of people, it might not be useful for others. Specifically, based on kind of the work that I did, if you have an intervention for mental health for younger people, it probably won't work for older LGBTQ+ people because of their lived experiences and different life trajectories. Similarly, if you're doing medical studies, if you have something that works for men, might not work for women because of metabolic and hormonal differences. There's also economic impact. If we use research inclusion, there's less research waste and improved practice, because if you already include a diverse sample, there's no need to kind of do several more research projects, therefore wasting money and time. There's also a moral imperative to ensure that the research benefits all people in society. So we're talking about human rights and ethics. And finally, by not using research inclusion or by not being inclusive, we kind of risk being discriminatory under the Equality Act 2010. Just a little kind of background of the Equality Act. So the 2010 is the latest version that we're using, and it covers 9 protected characteristics. So age, sex, religion, race, gender reassignment, sexual orientation, marriage and partnership, pregnancy, and maternity. So those are the characteristics that we are not allowed to discriminate against. Unfortunately, discrimination still happens, but by being inclusive in research, we try to kind of not. How do we get a good inclusive project? How do we do research inclusion? So there's some guidance on NIHR's website around research inclusion, but this is kind of the short side of it. Research inclusion statements need to be substantiated. So if you want to be inclusive, if you want to, for example, research several different sites or approach several different communities, it's not enough to say, we'll just recruit from more depraved areas. Why? Who is there? How will you recruit? Why are you not recruiting from other areas? What does research, or kind of if you did a scoping review, are you aware of the inequalities in the field already? So what do we know about the project even before we start doing it? How will your approach be inclusive? So thinking about not only kind of the protected characteristics, but all the other elements of diversity. Research needs to be shaped by diverse and inclusive patient and public involvement, PPI. So teams should work together with PPI from the beginning, so from research design to impact dissemination, and to kind of embed research inclusion at each stage of the project. And as Eugenie mentioned, it's always good to have that person who will kind of be a coordinator for PPI, just to have someone who's there all of the way supporting them. Then again, how diverse is your planned PPI? So who are the people that are participating? Can you reach out to other groups to increase that diversity? We need to include underserved areas in the study, have the research team identify potential barriers to including these groups. How can we overcome these barriers? Is there a justification for the chosen sites? And then how can we justify the research sample? Where is the problem the greatest, but the research activity the sparsest? Are the exclusion criteria justifiable? So thinking about who are we excluding and why. We need to explain all of those in detail. How will equality, diversity, and inclusion data be collected? How will it be captured? Will everything be collected? Why not? And so on. Then using methodologies specific methodologies can also help in overcoming barriers and exclusionary aspects of more conventional methods, and I'll show you this on my own project. But for example, using community engagement, arts-based methods, photo voice, images, something that might not require written word if you're working with people with learning disabilities, using images, easy read documents. So thinking kind of outside the box in terms of the methodologies that you use. And finally, what's also good, as research inclusion is now a requirement, there is a budget for it. So you need to budget for inclusion. From PPI engagement to any necessary training to any sort of remuneration that you're giving to participants, PPI, whatever sort of your funding is. But also be flexible in it. Again, we mentioned this already. Things change during the project, so have a little leeway about how this budgeting will go. So moving on to LOASCA, the LGBTQ plus older adult social care assessment study. I was a research fellow on this project, which was done by the universities of Birmingham, Manchester, Bristol, and Opening Doors. And we had a core team of 5 researchers and a co-researcher team of 8 co-researchers. So it was a co-produced project from the start. And we were guided kind of with the no research about us, without us motto. And our co-researchers were all older LGBTQ plus people with experience of social care, either personally or professionally. Some of them were actually social care workers. To give you a bit of an outline of the project, the aim was to investigate how social care professionals engage with sexual orientation and gender identity when assessing the care and support needs of older LGBTQ plus people. We did the study across 3 local authorities in the West Midlands. One was a very big urban, one was a rural, and one was a suburban one. So we had a mix of sites, and we had 5 types of data collection, 4, kind of 2 interviews. So we did a survey with professionals, we did interviews with professionals and service users, anonymized case files, and we analyzed organizational documents. So I won't go into data collection right now because that's not relevant for today, but I want to show you on this example why research inclusion is important. So in order to understand it, I need to kind of take you back and give you some background about the people who were involved in the project. And we need to understand why certain groups have been excluded from research to help us think how we can address these exclusions in the future. So this is kind of the background that we used for our project. This is what we know on the topic of older LGBTQ plus people and social care. So we know that there's health disparities between older LGBTQ plus people and their heterosexual counterparts. This is because of historic discrimination, criminalization. If you don't know, homosexuality was decriminalized in England in 1967 for men. So before that, if you were a man engaging in sexual relations with a man, you could be sent to jail. Up until 1992 or 3, the World Health Organization classified homosexuality as a mental illness, so you could be diagnosed, have a diagnosis. And even now, with the Gender Recognition Act, you need to be diagnosed as being gender dysphoric in order to get your gender recognition certificate. So all of these negative consequences, political, legal, and societal, have an impact on these people's lives. There are increased demands on social care to develop inclusive services, so the services are still not inclusive. Very much talking about diversity and inclusion, the discussion often goes to ethnicity and race, and then all other kind of protected characteristics seem to be subsumed under the general kind of diversity topic. So there's not a lot of understanding of other protected characteristics. Services are also required to collect data about gender and sexual identity, but that's not always happening. And this is something that can be, I think, applied to wider research. Collecting data can be problematic because we need to justify why we're collecting the data, where will it go, how will we use it. But by not collecting data, we don't know numbers of the people who we need to research. So, for example, in one of the sites, they had 16,000 older adults in their social care service. They told us they had 6 who identified as LGBT. And that is not impossible, but it's not true. So it's because they didn't collect the data and they couldn't kind of create services for that group of people. Whereas if you have a group of a religious minority, you will make an effort to create services for them because you collect data on religion. Social work and social care have been accused of being sexuality and gender blind, which is something that we found. It's that kind of very nice idea of we treat everyone the same, and I'm very open as a social worker, and why wouldn't people tell me things about themselves? Which we say, well, okay, they don't tell you if they're gay or lesbian, would you ask? Oh, no, that's too personal, I wouldn't go into it. Historical experiences, as I mentioned, for older LGBTQ plus people matter. People who were prosecuted in the past, for example, even if they're out and married and living as a gay couple, won't hold hands, won't do that kind of spontaneous public display of affection because of past trauma. Older LGBTQ plus people are also less likely to have familial support. They often use families of choice, so that they can be biological family members, but mostly they are friends, partners, and so on. They often seek social support from within their groups. So they are going to their community organizations and looking for social support there instead of going through kind of the proper or the official channels of local authorities. They often describe going back into the closet when dealing with social care professionals, so pretending to be straight, de-gaying their house, so removing all aspects of their identity in that sense, photos, rainbow flags, and so on. If a social care worker is coming into their house, they don't know who they are, they don't know how they'll react. And they are often deemed invisible within the older population. So when we talk about older people and sex in general, older people don't have sex, that's kind of the general consensus. If you include sexual identity, then you're kind of, who even are you? You don't exist. Obviously, older people have sex. This was a stereotype that we're trying to. So some of the findings from our project, which reflect kind of this background and the lack of research inclusion in this area, is that LGBTQ plus people are often missing from policy considerations and staff discussions. So we analyzed documents, action plans, EDI training, all sorts of documents. There was only, I think, 1 or 2 instances where LGBT training was specifically mentioned. It was all EDI training, diversity training, and so on. There's a lack of clear mechanisms for collecting data on sexual orientation and gender identity. As I said, the forms, I think some of them now start asking about it, kind of the front page of the forms, but social workers themselves feel really uncomfortable about asking that, which on the other hand, they don't feel uncomfortable asking about incontinence, toileting problems, and things like that. So it's just making questions normal or standard will just normalize this even further. On the upside, social care professionals are asking for more knowledge and training to apply in their practice. And one of the kind of contributions from this project was that we did deliver training for a London council, and they are planning to make it obligatory. So once a year, LGBT training for their workers. Now, the outputs that we had are academic papers, conference presentations, policy and practice briefs, kind of the boring bit. But what I want to draw your attention to are the animated video, the knowledge repository, and the graphic novel. So we wanted to do specifically this graphic novel. This is the last kind of 5-6 panels from one of the novels. Was a translation of the findings that we did into a format that can be understood even if you didn't know English or if you didn't know how to read. So the other panels have text on it. They follow a story, but you don't need to know what it says in order to follow the story. So for example, this one is about 2 older lesbians who are a couple. One of them ends up in a care home, and the sister doesn't allow her partner to visit. And then with the help of the social worker, they kind of meet up. So all of the stories have a happy ending, and we wanted to produce them for our service users to see that there is good practice and how it can be achieved. The animated video was aimed at the professionals, so they were, it was kind of a story about a social care worker visiting an older lesbian, and then at one point the woman says, oh, I'm a lesbian, that's why I don't have many connections with my family. And then the social worker has an option. Do I continue this conversation or do I glance over it? And kind of where do they go from there? And through all of this, so from the very beginning of the research design to basically dissemination and outputs, we had help with our core researchers. So they were trained in data collection, in managing kind of their own expectations, ethics, and so on. But also they helped us with data analysis. They gave feedback on all of the outputs. There's also a core researcher framework in the works to kind of make a document that can be then used by other social care researchers and other academics who want to use core researchers in that capacity. This will be specifically for older LGBTQ+ people because there's so few of them around. And our graphic novel was done by Dominique Brouwers, who did some other work around dementia, I think King's College London, but they did an excellent job. Now, linking this back into research inclusion. So when we did the project, research inclusion wasn't a requirement. But as soon as you have kind of LGBT, you assume you are very inclusive. First of all, our research team was 4 older gay men and me, all white. Our core research team was 8 older LGBTQ+ people, all white. We had 1 trans person. So diversity, yes, not to the extent that you would kind of expect. So what worked? Involving core researchers with lived experience, as I mentioned, all throughout the project. Every time we present our study at conferences or online, we have one of the core researchers present with us. When we do training, one of the core researchers does the training with us. And it makes a difference, not only for them because they're involved, but for the audience as well. Because it kind of, you can see when we did the training that the social care workers, it hits them when the person who actually lived through that tells them the stories. We disseminated our findings in accessible formats. So as I mentioned, the graphic novel, the video, and we modified our data collection to fit the participants' lived experiences. So when I talked about creative methods, this wasn't very creative. We just shifted from a focus group to interviews. But still, we found that we wanted to do focus groups with older LGBTQ+ service users, but there was, well, no chance. We didn't find anyone who would participate in that focus group because even though they might have been out, they might have identified as LGBTQ+, they were like, I don't share the same experiences as the next person, and I don't want to kind of be there where my experiences can be out in public. So we said, okay, we'll just do individual interviews with yourselves. We can do it with carers. We extended it to the whole of England, excluding London. We lowered the age range to 60, and we managed to get 13 people across kind of the entirety of England. Again, pointing to lack of visibility and lack of trust in research, because most people, even when they talk to us, they were like, okay, so how will this benefit me? Where can I find something? Will this improve my social care experience? Which at kind of the point of the research, you don't really know, but we tried to send all the findings to them and kind of keep them in touch. And that's kind of one of the things that didn't work, low number of participants. No representation of ethnic minority groups within the research team or co-researchers. So as I said, all very white, very, I guess I could say middle class, upper middle class. So it was a very specific group of people. And I did my PhD on older same-sex couples. And what I found, I had 7 couples in Scotland, so also very low. But people who participate in research are people of a certain economic and even political standing. So they were all quite left-wing, talking about my PhD, being out on TV already, out on radio, not being afraid to speak out. So you kind of almost don't want those people. You want the people who are afraid, who don't participate. You want those experiences, but it's really difficult to get to them. And there was an underrepresentation of gender diverse participants. So in terms of our participants, lesbian and gay was the main identity. I think one of them said other, which we can't assume means anything, but we didn't have anyone identifying as either non-binary, gender diverse, or trans. So how to get research inclusion right? Engaging with community organizations is key. So starting from you know, who is around, what is the research telling you, which areas need to be more explored, providing training on EDI and research inclusion to your research team. So what does it mean to be diverse? It's not just, oh yeah, we'll just go to this like religious group or to this ethnic group. No, there's at least 9 other things that you can be looking at, but also the intersection of those. So what we saw in this project is a belief that if you believe to one minority, one protected characteristic, you can't be in another one. So there's no mixing. So if you're a black man, you can't possibly be an older gay black man because that's not possible, which isn't, again, reflective of real life, but that's just how the sector is. Which then leads me to this point of an understanding inclusion through intersectionality. So not being stuck on just one characteristic, but thinking about what that person's lived experience tells you. And finally, thinking about inclusion every step of the way, from the idea of the project to dissemination. So not bringing in your PPIE or thinking about diversity when you start your data collection or when you kind of figure out which settings you want, but kind of have people involved from the beginning, because not only will you enrich your project, you'll get ideas, but you'll ensure that it's definitely more inclusive. And that is all for me. Sorry, I thought there was a thank you slide.
Thanks, Dora. That was really interesting. Thank you very much. Look forward to some interesting questions to the panel. Right, close your eyes again. I'm now going to hand over to David, who travelled up from Leicester specially. So thank you, David, and welcome. It's just
this one, isn't it?
next.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me along today. I really appreciate you taking an interest in the work that we're doing. I hope it will be useful today. Also, just reiterate the messages from the previous presentations. Hopefully the presentation I'll do bear some of the lessons that are learnt in mind as we go through the presentation. So basically, what I wanted to talk about today is LifeMap, and this is about supporting PPI contributions in the design of the LifeMap Vest. So as I said, I'm the PPI lead on the LifeMap project. And so my role has already been highlighted, is very much that person that has been talked about, that is there to coordinate and support people to take part in the project. Give you a little bit of background about LifeMap. So over 3 million people die every year from lethal heart rhythms. And the current treatment that's used for that is a pacemaker type device. It's called an implantable cardioverter defibrillator, or ICD. And this actually shocks the heart to put it back into a normal rhythm should it go out of rhythm. You can see the diagram there. Basically, it's an implantable device that's implanted, and the wire goes into the heart, and that's shocked. It shocks the heart when needed. Under the current guidance, these ICDs are given, but actually only 40% of the ICDs are ever used by patients. And when you consider that the cost to the NHS is £10,000, and that's not taking into account the human cost of having one of the ICDs, you know, there has to be an operation that's undertaken, that can have risks, and then there's also a psychological aspect to it. So you can see it's important to try and get that. So there's actually not a current effective way of knowing who really would benefit from one of these ICDs. And this is where LifeMap comes in. So LifeMap is a novel ECG, electrocardiogram-based technology. So what it does is it identifies some ECG markers to predict who will have these lethal heart rhythms, and so identify people who will benefit from the ICD. Has anybody ever undertaken an exercise ECG here in the room? No. I had one a few years ago. This is the equipment that's used. I mean, basically what happens is that's a treadmill, and they often call it a stress test. So basically, as you'll see a bit later on, they attach the electrodes and then they put you on this treadmill, and then you walk up and along the slope. So LifeMap is using that technology to look at predicting who may need these ICDs. It's actually been developed over a number of years and it's now ready for further testing. I should say I'm not a clinician, by the way, so this is my interpretation of this, but there's quite a technical aspect to it. And obviously the clinicians that are involved in the project very much are into that. My role is very much supporting the PPI input into it. So there's two parts to LifeMap. The first part is a LifeMap vest, and this is worn by patients. And it's designed to produce a clearer ECG signal, and I'll show you a little bit of that later on. And then there's LifeMap Compute, so it takes that signal, uses a computer algorithm, and it will be used to predict whether somebody requires one of the ICDs. So the current project that we're on is called LifeMap Quest study. So this is very much about the vest rather than the actual developing the algorithm. So it's very much about testing the vest out. So the actual project, the study itself, is a clinical study which will look at whether the vest can be used reliably in different health settings, and that patients and cardiologists are satisfied with it. Quest stands for Quality Assurance, User-Focused Evaluation, Safety and Tolerability. So it very much is about whether people feel satisfied with that. It's funded through an Invention for Innovation grant, an I4I grant, and the principal investigator is Professor Andre Ulm, who is a professor of cardiac electrophysiology and a consultant cardiologist and electrophysiologist at Leicester. So basically, LifeMap Quest will seek to test this vest with 120 people across 4 different sites, hospitals, one in Leicester, London, Coventry and Warwick, and actually here in Newcastle as well. So we've worked with an SME called Renfu on the design of the vest. This is just from their website. They're a company that specialises in medical devices. Obviously, the LifeMap vest is a wearable medical device. So we've been working with them in partnership on designing the vest. So just to give you an idea of the current ECG. So basically, you can see the wires and how it's attached to the person, but the wires are sort of hanging down and all quite loose. If we look at what that means then in terms of the exercise ECG, what you can see is that the wires are kind of flapping around, and this creates a certain level of electrical noise, and obviously that disrupts the system. So I can't actually show you a copy of the vest because there's IP and patent issues, but hopefully this gives you an idea of you know, how the vest, which actually is sometimes described as a belt or a harness, contains the actual wires so that they stop moving around. So I hope that kind of gives you an idea. So what was the starting point for PPI? So when I became involved in the actual LifeMap Quest started, there'd already been some design with the LifeMap vest, but it was still very much in development. And so our starting point really was to look at getting a user or patient perspective on the quality assurance of the vest. For example, does it feel comfortable? Does it fit right? Is it easy to put on, take off? How do people feel when using it, when exercising? So there was a real challenge here around actually getting this diversity of people involved in this. Diversity in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, and actually from our perspective, although not a protective characteristic, different shapes and sizes of people because it's a wearable device. So we were very much looking at doing that to inform the LifeMap vest and also the trial documentation as well. Because although I'll be focusing on the design of the vest, actually the PPI work has also involved creating patient questionnaires and patient information for the clinical trial. But we'll be very much focusing on the work that we did around the vest. So seeking some inclusivity then, I suppose we had a PPI co-applicant. And again, I would always recommend this. These are people with experts in their experience who can come along and support you in terms of thinking about how you might go about finding people to take part in the study. So we work very closely with our PPI co-applicant. We also had support from local charities. A particular mention would be South Asian Health Action. Now, they not only helped us to recruit people from the South Asian community. If people know anything about Leicester, then there is a big South Asian community there. But as I was saying earlier on before we start, Leicester's a very diverse city. We're fortunate in that way. There's over 200 languages spoken in Leicester. But you still do find, from an inclusive point of view, as you were mentioning, very much, kind of white, middle-class people are involved in the research. So we wanted to go out and reach out to different communities. So South Asian Health Action were a really good connection to local communities. We also, as a Take Heart support group, so the people that took part from a PPI perspective also had heart conditions, which meant that they'd had experiences of ECGs or of the patient journey around heart conditions. So we went out to support groups. We also looked at contacting local groups and charities by different channels. I mentioned email here. WhatsApp is another key one that people seem to use these days. Text, actually, having a mobile phone that you can text people and talk to people is really important. It sounds very basic, but basically, these different channels. And actually, we used some of the old-fashioned methods of going out, putting posters in libraries, these kind of things, to try and sort of attract and get a diverse set of people involved. We also linked with some of the local NIHR infrastructure, particularly the Biomedical Research Centre. Again, they'd been working quite hard to get some local connections. The Research Support Service, again, we were able to reach out and get some support from them. And also in Leicester, we have the Centre for Ethnic Health Research. And again, all this infrastructure can help in terms of promoting the work you're doing and getting the message out there. A key one I wanted to mention was this idea of snowballing. So as we actually got PPI members involved in there, they actually use their local networks as well to reach out to different communities, to different people, and encourage people to take part. And I think that helped us to get a kind of diverse group of people. And I would reiterate as well, this was by no means perfect. We did our best to get a diverse set of people. But again, you will always find that there may be gaps there, and we're conscious of continually to work in this area to seek inclusivity. So in terms of promoting inclusivity, what I would say is that what we did is we formed a PPI Life Map Quest advisory group, and the group actually wanted to meet face-to-face. Now, that might not be the case with every group, but in the context of Life Map, people really, really did want to meet face-to-face and be able to form those kind of relationships with each other. We also developed a clear set of values and ground rules to make sure the space was safe, about making sure that people's perspectives were valued in there, and that that people felt that they could talk and give their perspective, and that it would be listened to. Another thing that was important really for us was a dedicated accessible meeting location. Many of the people that we worked with had mobility problems or heart conditions, which meant walking may be difficult. So having somewhere they could come in the car, park up and get there easily was important for people to be able to access it. And I think from a practical basis, I mean, we tended to do our meetings in the day, but in hindsight, you would probably want to think about the timing of when meetings take place. But it worked pretty well for our group at this time. And again, there's not a one-size-fits-all. It depends on the group, it depends on the dynamic and what you're trying to achieve. I'm going to highlight some work we did around the workshops, but I think we ran a number of workshops that brought the designers, clinicians, the project team and PPI contributors together. And I'll give you an example of some of that work. We also, for each activity we did, we had regular evaluations so we could kind of see what the issues were and whether there was any issues that people felt about inclusivity, whether that was that people just didn't feel as if they could, were not making any difference, or that they weren't being listened to. And actually, we've just reached a point where we're actually also doing an independent evaluation. This will be, to make sure that we learn any lessons from what we've done really over the last couple of years. Now, just talk about the show and tell workshops. Now, it was loosely based on some work I did a few years ago called Technology for Healthy Aging and Wellbeing Co-Producing Solutions, where there's a set of techniques that we kind of used, similar to thinking about the kind of methodology that you might do. But this was very much taken from then, this idea of a show and tell workshop. And I would suggest to you there's elements of co-production within it, but it's not necessarily full production. I mean, in the end, we still retained the power to make the decisions over what was included in the vest. So I think it's important sometimes, co-production has become a kind of buzz term, but it's important to recognise where you may be on that ladder of intervention. And I think we were probably somewhere kind of between the engagement and co-production. There were certainly elements of it. But the idea of these workshops was very, very much about bringing people together, all together to be able to comment on the Life Map vest. This was our kind of feedback loop with different iterations. So the show element was bringing people together to show them the Life Map vest. The PPI feedback could then tell the designers what they felt needed to change. The team could take that away, possibly look at any changes or implications or issue, make any changes, and then bring it back to the group again, and so on and so forth, so that you had this kind of iterative approach to it. And if you're familiar with kind of any kind of technology, this kind of iteration is part of that development. So I just wanted to talk about one example, really. We did the first workshop that we did, show and tell workshop. So there was 13 PPI contributors, 7 men and 6 women. You'll see that gender balance is significant in terms of how the vest developed. And we had different representatives from Renfrew, the designers, cardiophysiology, clinical fellows in the project team. So the aims of this first workshop really was to give a context around what we were doing. I think that's important. It's that translational aspect so that people are aware and can feel as if they understand where we were coming from. So, what the exercise test ECG entailed. Many of the people we involved already knew that because they'd already undertaken one. But then to give people a demo and to try on the vest, and then also for them to feedback those first impressions to the designers and to make any suggestions for improvement. The sessions were designed to be really interactive. So we had things like display boards, which showed how the actual vest had been developed by Renfrew, through the different prototypes, so people could engage with that. We had videos of people on the treadmill, as you've seen. We also then, the cardiophysiologists were able to fit the vest to somebody in a room, show people how it would be demoed, and we were able to give people time to try the vest on, touch it, walk around with it on, all sorts of things. This was over their clothes, because with an exercise ECG, your top is normally removed. But people were able to put it over the clothes and to get different views and interact with each other over it. So they could do this lots of different times, and it gave them the opportunity to sort of ask questions really and gain a better understanding of what the vest was about, and ask different questions. For example, how is it adjusted? How is it taken off? So that was the show element. That was us showing what the vest is about. In terms of the tell aspect, we asked people to give the first impressions of the vest, and we did this through a kind of questionnaire, where we just sort of asked people to rate the fit, the size, how it attached to the body, what restrictions people felt, whether they felt the feel, the weight and texture was good, whether they felt that it would likely produce any harm, or if they felt that they felt any pain by wearing it. And also how it looks. We had some real debates about that, actually, with people saying, well, does it really matter how it looks, but other people not? So again, you get some very interesting perspectives on that. So we spent time discussing the positive and negative aspects of this, telling the designers about the vest, and that then also gave them that opportunity to ask questions of the PPI group and the contributors. So it very much was that interactive approach that was really important in these kind of workshops. So what we were told from this workshop then was that actually most contributors did find that the Life Mat vest was comfortable and easy to use. They also commented on things, for example, like that it would be easy to clean because of the way it was designed. So there were some surprising comments that people had that we perhaps didn't expect. But there were some things that were highlighted as not okay. And again, this links into having a diversity here. So women contributors with larger busts, for example, actually felt that the straps did not sit flush and this was uncomfortable. And again, we would have never got that feedback without having that kind of diversity in there. For many, the straps were too stiff around the neck, and there was other issues around the hard feel of the plastic and the material used in the prototype. People highlighted the vest was actually heavy. And again, something we didn't expect, people raised concerns about, well, what would happen if you needed to remove the vest? If somebody was having a cardiac arrest, what needed to happen? So for the designers then, what did this lead to for the design really? So actually, I think, the designers were already aware of some of these issues, like the materials and stuff like that, but they were able to listen to that. And actually what we found, there was improved comfort because actually it did start to look at softer materials. And one of the next workshops we did, PPI contributors were able to choose the materials to go into the vest. And then there was a quick release button that was incorporated into it in case of emergencies. So these were sort of direct impact really on how PP contributors had contributed to the design of the vest. Just a few quotes from the evaluation that we did of that. So I think these are real important points from the PPI's perspectives. So having the presence of designers, so just people being in the same room is really important for possible adaptations. People in all the evaluations have said about the tangibility, getting their hands on the product that you may be designing or whatever it is. Being very hands-on is really, really important. Having the different voices to interact with, so it's not just the interaction between, say, the designers and PPI, but also the different contributors in the actual room. The difference between men and women talking about it, different groups of people are really important, and that links into what we said about the really importance with this kind of wearable device of having a women's point of view as well as men's, and other points of view in there that maybe with different people who may be different shapes and sizes. And people really valued the fact that, there was lots of different people with lived experiences, that some younger, some older people as well within there. So really important to kind of get that different mix of people involved in this, in the design. For Renfrew, I won't read out all these quotes, but basically, they really, really appreciated this approach and felt that, having this fresh pair of eyes really helped to improve the product, really, improve the vest in terms of comfort, safety, and important performance. I think they also recognised, and I think all of us recognise, there is a pragmatism around design and involving PPI in terms of, what's possible, what people might like. And I think the group were very good in terms of thinking through that and thinking about that, in the end, we needed to develop this product in a particular way, in a particular setting. So they were really, really sort of positive about the fact that, there is compromises to be made in any kind of design of these products. So for me, the outcomes of the project really, for the project, that the PPI contributors really helped to inform and improve the Life Mat vest design. It provided the team with reassurance that we were getting it right. And then the importance of having the different perspectives, particularly from women contributors, and the different sizes was particularly important regarding the design, as we've seen. It would likely be uncomfortable for particular people if we hadn't had those perspectives. I think the workshops really helped us build the relationships that people have talked about, because they were interactive and people got a sense of ownership around those for the vest. People were very, very enthusiastic about it, and they acted very much as critical friends that helped shape the vest. And as a result, as we've seen with the quick release button you know, the vest is actually involved in ways that we didn't realise it would at the time. So these were just my thoughts based on the UK standards for public involvement, some sort of lessons for SMEs really. We've touched on this with the other presentations, but inclusive opportunities, it is the benefit of having those different perspectives to feel like you have got a really good understanding of what user needs and preferences are across the board. Creating the right environment for people to be involved. I can't stress that enough, really. You know, it's such an important aspect in terms of involving people, that people feel it's safe and people feel that they're able to contribute. That links into working together. To me, having regular meetings and interactive workshops, and seeing the contributors as part of the team. You know, not just seeing them as sort of over there, but very much part of the team. On equal status, really. And what I mean by that is that their views are as equally thought of as valid as anybody else's within the team. Communications, if you ask any PPI members, they will always say, getting regular updates is really important. That will help you build relationships with people, because you'll be having that interaction with people and giving them regular updates. On the project more broadly, not just about, say, the design of the vest in this case, but just keeping them involved, you know. And just to say, you know, people do want to get involved in different ways. Some people are more interactive and maybe more willing to attend meetings than other people. But, you know, I think it's important that people are involved in the way that's important to them. I would say, please be open to learning and reflexivity. We were talking about this earlier on. At the end of the day, we're all learning from this, you know. We're very much still, you know, keeping that open mind is really important. And I would say PPI contributors are great critical friends. And what I mean by that is that in terms of LifeMap, people were really, really enthusiastic about the vest. They really wanted it to work. It's the same with all sort of research that gets involved. People do want things to work and they really want to give back. But by bringing those perspectives in, you do get that kind of critical aspect, which I think is really important, that will help you progress whatever product or whatever research you're progressing. Certainly the impact side, make whatever you're doing purposeful and show how contributors are making a difference. That's incredibly important for people. And if you can involve them at all the stages of development, that's great. It's not always possible to involve people in the same way, but I think just be aware of trying to involve people in you know, as much as possible within the different areas that you may be looking at. And finally, just to reiterate in terms of governance, and I think that it's come across already, you know, supporting PPI work is very time and resource intensive. We're fortunate in LifeMap because we've got a dedicated role to that. That's given time to plan activities properly, to support people. I mean, let me give you an example. Recently, you know, we've got people who are carers on the group, and being able to speak to them and provide support when perhaps with caring, all these sorts of things come in. And if you really want inclusiveness, you really need to provide this kind of support and recognise that people will have different needs. And so having somebody that can talk to people, be there to communicate and get support, for them to get support from, is really important. I mean, for me, one of the best things that was provided was a mobile phone that people could contact me on and things like that. Very little thing, but really important to somebody that may be being involved, so that people, when they may be ill, they can contact you or talk to you about it, etc. So I would say, yeah, PPI co-applicants as well, incredibly important. And the project more broadly supportive. We've had a very, very supportive team in LifeMap around PPI, and that's incredibly important, I think, that everybody's on that same page of making sure that PPI is very central to the project. And finally, yeah, you know, the resources to provide appropriate rewards for people. You know, I would say there is different ways of providing rewards that you can think about. In the context of LifeMap, we very much go for cash payments. That's what people wanted. And so I think that's really important. So that's just some of the sort of messages that I would suggest. My final one would be a quote from Maya Angelou, which would be say, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And to me, that is one of the key things you should be aiming for. Put yourself in those person's shoes. How do they feel? How would you feel now? And I think that's a good rule of thumb for thinking about how PPI should be about, and what would you want to get from this if you were being asked to be involved in the project that you're working on. That's me done.
David, do you want to stay up? Yeah. Thanks, David. That was really interesting, really useful. Some really good tips there for SMEs and really brought it to life with the case study. So we're just going to move into the expert panel and the fireside chat. So if everyone wants to join, not everyone, but the keynotes and experts. Right. Does everyone just want to start by introducing themselves and giving a background about your role within PPIE and inclusivity? So I'll start with Jo, who's just joined us for the panel.
Yeah, so Jo Lally, I'm strategic lead for patient public involvement and quality, diversity, inclusion for the RSS based in Newcastle, and I'm also the national lead for patient public involvement. I'm a qualitative researcher by background, so have been doing lots of research that kind of mirrors some of the things around PPI alongside large trials, so find out patient experience. So it's a natural progression for me to then go into involving patients in the research. So it's my role if researchers, SMEs come to the RSS to help support them through the processes that everybody else has spoken about today.
I am, well, Dave Clayton. I'm from the University of Leicester, PPI lead on Live MapQuest, as I said. My background really is not so much academic, although I recently moved into academia probably 4 or 5 years ago, and like yourself, more on the qualitative research side. But prior to that, I had 20 years experience of working in local authorities and social services as a frontline social worker and then into management and commissioning. So that kind of, in social care, you know, we've been involved with kind of co-production for quite a while. So it was a kind of natural step into looking at PPI work.
Yeah, I'm Eugenie Johnson. I'm a research assistant in evidence synthesis at the NIHR Innovation Observatory. So I do a lot of systematic reviews, horizon scanning, and other types of evidence synthesis. And part of my role is embedding PPI into that and making sure that it's meaningful and inclusive. Bit like David, my background is not in academia. My first degree was in English literature, and I was a freelance journalist for a while. So I was quite used to talking to people and asking them questions for various reasons. And I think that's why I became really interested in the methods around PPI and involving people in the work that we do, simply because I like asking questions and I like to know what people think about things. So yeah, I think that's where my initial love of the area came from.
My name is Dora Jandrić. I work with Jo at the NHR RSS hub, just up the road. So as I said, I'm the EDI methodologist, so I provide support for equality, diversity, and research inclusion for researchers. My background is academic, so as I mentioned, I did my PhD at Edinburgh. My topic area is very much LGBT aging. I did this project at Birmingham in social work, social care, and just kind of seeing the need for EDI and research inclusion throughout my career, I thought this would be a good opportunity to be on the kind of other side of it and to tell people what they need to do instead of doing it, which I like. So yeah, that brings me here.
Has anyone in the audience got any questions for the panel? Is anyone an SME that's currently looking at PPIE for an application or for a funding pitch? Angela? Yes. So what stage are you at in terms of PPIE?
Just beginning really. I did a small digital survey and the uptake wasn't great, but I really feel like we do need that professional input to really make sure it's inclusive. I was particularly with paediatric patients, and it will be on kind of as they come into emergency care. So it's how do we actually make sure that is inclusive when you can't really select out? You know, when you're dealing with patients who are coming into emergency care for paediatric urine analysis, that kind of question. Yeah.
Okay.
Have you found your PPIE journey? So has it been obvious who to go to, where to go for help?
No, that's all still to do.
Yeah.
At the very beginning, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just testing the theory that we're on the right level in terms of like what we're covering and how we're trying to kind of signpost and support. So yeah.
Yes, it is massive. I've just been, I'm impressed by, well, impressed and overwhelmed about how much there is involved in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can I just I think that adds an extra layer of complexity to it when you're dealing with pediatrics as well, because actually what you want to find out is how acceptable it is to the parents and what they want, but also no matter how young the child is, how acceptable, it will get explained to them as well. And people will often say, well, because it's young children or because it's teenagers, we'll just speak to the adults or the carers, which is a mistake, because actually the intervention, whatever it is that's happening, not that treatment, is happening to the young people themselves. And I know one of our team has actually done some PPI with quite young babies. So it's age isn't a barrier to that. And it's thinking about kind of how do we get that input from both parties? So how do we get the input from the parents? And that might be slightly different to how do we get the input from the young people, the children as well, and thinking creatively about that. So I think you've done that.
Yeah. I think I've certainly seen sort of studies where people have looked at engaging children in different ways. And as you say, what you're trying to do is to tailor, I suppose, the activities in ways that will be accessible to people, and you will be able to, get what you want from them. I know that, people have talked about creative sort of art-based type of methodologies and things. They might be quite useful for engaging children in. So I think, again, it depends on who you're kind of looking at and which methods that you use. But I think there is a lot of sort of case examples that you can draw on that the NIHR have got around some of these things. I also think, as I say, you've got the separation between the participation and the PPI. And again, if you think about involving people from a PPI, you're very much them supporting you in that design. So you don't necessarily know all the answers. That's one of the great things about having PPI involved. If you start involving people who may have those lived experiences, they can perhaps tell you, well, how could we think about getting a diverse set of people? What would make the difference if you were trying to recruit people in that environment? If you were trying to create, how would you approach people? What sort of things would we need to do? So by having that diversity within your PPI group, it's important. I think they will help you think through some of these issues and think about what some of the solutions may be in terms of getting participation in the study more generally.
I think making use of the resources that everybody's spoken about today, one of the big things is, I think it was Eugenie that mentioned about dipping in and dipping out into different communities and not developing that relationship. And often researchers and businesses don't have the time to develop that relationship because it's something new. So make use of all of those people, like people here, and there's lots of us around who already have those relationships. So we have relationships with lots of different communities across the country now because we're national service, but we would have people that we say, actually, we know a group who would be interested in this. We'll find out if they would be interested in talking to you as an SME about that particular thing because they've got lived experience. So using those networks and those trusted relationships already exist kind of shortcuts some of that work up front, because quite often we're all working to limited time and limited budgets and the deadline is here. It takes months, if not years, to develop some of those relationships that we have. So make use of those people that are around to support you in that.
Thank you. I'll certainly be tapping into those. I had already thought, at the design stage, we will be involving clinicians and, nursing, but it's really important to, this product will be used ideally in homes as well. So it's really important to have, those different languages and every aspect of it catered for. So yes, I will be tapping into it. Thank you.
I think all I'd say as well is certainly some type of kind of workshop approach where you're bringing the different stakeholders together can be really useful. The one that highlighted around technology for healthy aging and well-being was done in Sheffield. So there was a couple of workshops there. So there may be some interesting techniques around that. We use things like vignettes, case studies to help people, and people sat around a table and bringing those clinicians and that together can be useful. And as you say, drawing on some of those existing networks to try and run some of those workshops may be really useful, and it gives you an idea, and then you can start to think, do you need to develop some of those relationships as go, or you start to build those relationships, don't you?
Great, thank you.
Any more SMEs in the audience that are looking at PPIE?
I know it's a bit different, but just connected to what you were saying. Sorry. Just so everyone can hear it.
Yeah, and just connected to what you said. I don't know if you're based at Newcastle hospitals. No. Oh, right. I was going to say there's a young person's PPIE group at the RVI, and they have like the children and the parents as part of their group. But that's Newcastle hospitals, so I'm not sure if they would be able to help as much if you're outside, but they would definitely be able to give you pointers. And that's quite a long running group, and they are set up already. So that might be useful for you. I think the lady that runs it is called Jo, but I can't fully remember. But you'll be able to find it through Google.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Any questions from the audience? Anything else?
We do have one online. Oh, I'll go to you first.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sarah McCluskey. I'm an independent consultant and facilitator who helps researchers actually do some of this stuff. I was interested, and again, just kind of following on from the conversation you've just had, Eugenie, with the choice of the word rapid in your little framework, because it sounds like, from what everybody's saying and from my experience as well, doing PPIE is anything but rapid. So I just wondered a bit about the thinking there.
Yeah, well, that to clarify, that's because it's around a specific methodology that is rapid. So when we have systematic reviews, they can be done over months, sometimes years. But then because this was done for rapid evidence synthesis, sometimes that's a couple of weeks or maybe a little bit longer. So it's about how do you mobilize it in that very quick-paced environment. But I do agree because as Jo and David have kind of been saying, PPI, it takes a long, long time to build the relationships. And that's why in Ripples, we have those foundational aspects, which beyond those projects, you're kind of like building those relationships outside, and you're communicating with people and those who you want to be involved in the long term. So you're not just doing things in the project in a really, really quick way. You are just maintaining those relationships over time as well. So yeah, sorry if that kind of got lost a bit in translation. But yeah, I do agree that PPI does take a long time, especially in fostering those relationships, and that can make it meaningful throughout projects.
Yeah, I would say perhaps come from a bit of a different take on this, because I think it depends. Because clearly the ladder of intervention there, you kind of got co-production right down to sort of more kind of consultation. So I think sometimes that's quite legitimate. But what you're doing is you just want some kind of level of consultation. So it very much depends on what you're trying to get out, I think, of the PPI work. Definitely if you're kind of looking at co-production, in order for it to work well, I think you need to think about those relationships. But it may be that you just want to get a particular view on something, and it may be that there's an established group that you can take that out to, and you achieve what you want to achieve from it. So if you're going to do it, it depends on the model and approach that you want to take with it. So there can be sort of a rapid methods with it, but accepting it's limited in terms of what you may get out of it, really, I think.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. A slightly different question, but actually I'm working with respiratory health, and similar to the wearable devices that you are using. My question to you is, like, before going for PPI, what kind of stages you've gone through to take approval, and how long it take for you to get approval on the wearable devices?
So the actual development of the actual approach goes back about 15 years in terms of the actual technical side, in terms of what the clinicians were doing, and involved sort of a lot. Started with you know, animal research and things like that. So then there was a number of studies that were funded in order to progress the approach and test I suppose the proof of concept around it. And then there was another part in terms of working towards designing the initial prototypes before the eye for eye work. So there was a set of work over a number of years to sort of get the proof of concept going before the application was there. So that's when I got involved really in terms of putting together the plan around how we might involve PPI within the eye for eye approach really. And again, there was a real need and willingness to sort of involve people, recognizing that we'd reached a particular point where, you know, it would be really useful to involve PPI members in the design of the vest and the clinical trial really around the vest. So there was an awful lot of work that went in place beforehand, if that makes sense, which I wouldn't have been party to, but as you say, it's getting that gradual proof of concept of what you're doing and then moving it along that pipeline. I mean, people may have other things to say around how that works within the NIHA, because there's different funding streams, isn't there, that people can get through that.
Yeah, and I think whichever funding stream that you apply to when you're at this development kind of really close to having impact on patient benefit, PPI is an essential requirement. So it doesn't matter what your funding stream is, PPI needs to be in there. And I think it's important to note that not all of it has to be done before you get the funding. So there needs to be enough in there that the funders know and recognise that you've taken account of what the patients and public say about the work that you're doing, and they've had a say in how the project is designed and how it's going to be run. But some of this work that others have spoke about in terms of like co-producing the device, and that might come once you've got funded. So it's thinking about where do I need to do the pieces of work, and there's certainly a large amount needed to be done in that lead up, but that's kind of bounded by time and resource. Sometimes we only get 6 to 8 weeks between a call being put out and an application having to go in, so you've got to do it within that stage, but you can then fund it to do some really kind of interesting in-depth development work at the beginning of the funded project. So it's kind of continual.
Okay. Thank you. One more, but basically I'm using to remove that particular wearable devices, I tend to switch into the app-based recognition of the respiratory health. So is it same the ethical approval will apply for the app kind of devices?
In terms of, well, I mean, previously, you mean like a mobile phone type
Yeah,
app?
mobile
Yeah.
app, yeah.
Well, the project I worked on before this one was designing a mobile phone app. So yeah, I would say we worked again in a not too dissimilar way. I mean, you'll be aware of some techniques like talkback techniques around taking people through them. But again, you can use some really, really good creative approaches to involving people using wireframes and everything like that. So yeah, I think the general development of any kind of product or any kind of technology, this kind of iterative approach of involving people, what they call user-centered design, to me is always the key. So that's where it's about really getting people in very early, even at that initial stage. Like, you're obviously thinking, do we need an app? Well, start to have those conversations with people, because actually people might say, actually, what we need is this. So I think that's where involving people comes in. And again, very much, who is it that this is aimed at? You know, involving those people with those lived experiences, because I think sometimes what does happen with PPI is perhaps you do get kind of people that are call them the usual suspects, you know, people that have been involved in different things. And actually what you want to do is think, well, who is it who this is going to impact on? Because they will be the person that will say, actually, I don't like this idea, or I don't, because you want to really be sure. 75% of apps fail. Yeah. It's worth thinking about, you know, so what is it that people need, and how is that going to work and develop? And your users will really give you a good view on that. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Of 35 patients, but my experience was they were actually not very willingly to learn the app. So I have to, you know, they all were geriatric patients, so they don't want to learn it. So I have to handle it through to record and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting again. So you could have those conversations about people about what that would mean in terms of the design of the app, and is there different ways of doing that. we know that, you know, there's technology is moving on. What were the issues for people that they felt, you know, was it the dexterity? Is it older people you're looking at? There's lots of different questions. But I think, you know, involving people and making it quite tangible, for example, taking out a prototype of something and saying this would be it, you'll get some really, really good feedback from people, good and bad. You have to be prepared for it to take it.
I think that's what I was going to say. You've got to be prepared in that you might have an idea, and we get lots of researchers come to us with an idea that I want to produce an app or I want to produce a device. And then we get them to take a step back and say, just go and talk to the patients with that particular condition and see what they want. So you've got to be prepared for the patients to come back and say, we don't want that. And that's all part of it. So I think it's making sure that you're setting your expectations, that they might not agree with you. They might, and they'll give you ideas of how to change it, but they might not.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I've always learnt in life is that plans are great until you put people in them.
Thank you so much.
Did you have a question online, Jen?
Yeah, we've run out of
we've got time
time,
for
but
one
I've
more.
got two very patient people that have been waiting. So a message from Kevin. He said, is there any strategy to deal with the transience impermanence of some patient groups, e.g. mental health?
So, yeah, I think there is. And I think it's about talking to those populations. And one that you could argue is that transient population is pregnant women, as an example. So you're not pregnant very long, 9 months. So that, therefore, how long after that event are you able to comment on research about pregnancy? So it's the same with mental health. How long after the event? How long after the episode? So it's about working with the community on whether or not they feel that 2 years postpartum, 2 years after you've been admitted for a mental health episode, can you still comment on that particular event? So I think it's really particular to the clinical condition and the area of concern. We've got pregnant women who are 5-10 years postpartum and are still commenting on pregnancy research because they still feel that their lived experience is relevant.
That's somebody who's had like a mental health episode, you might have to consider as well how quickly after the event they're capable of discussing these sorts of things. So if you have somebody who's like freshly out of something, they might not actually have the clarity to be able to answer the questions that you want and also to be able to give you useful feedback.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's really interesting.
Can I just say, I mean, I think, and the other thing I would say is, again, when you think about what we mean by involvement, can also be quite important with people with mental health problems as well. Again, you know, I mean, again, it depends on the project and what involvement that you want, but it may be that people do come in and out of say, if you set up a group and people may be in and out. And I think one of the things that I've certainly found that, you know, where people perhaps are not able to make some of the meetings, just having kind of one-to-one meetings and sitting down with people. So again, it gets back to that real, have you got the resource to, have you costed that resource in to think about how you might engage with people that perhaps are experiencing some issues, you know, even, you know, a personable visit maybe, that you go and see people or recognise those kind of things. So to me, I think there is ways in which you can sort of support that process, but taking on board, yeah, you know, if people become ill, that's what can happen in these situations, you know. And I've certainly worked with people who on PPI groups who have passed away as well. So, you know, these things do happen and you have to be prepared that can happen.
Thank you. Hope that helps, Kevin. One last question, 2 seconds. So Charlotte has said, asked, what is the best way to deal with and acknowledge competing or different needs or wants from different stakeholders within a PPI group?
Can I take that one? So in our, we call them co-researchers. They were a PPI group, but in our co-researcher group, we had, as I said, a trans person, and we had someone who was kind of through the middle of our project diagnosed with ADHD. So what we did from the beginning was, and something that was mentioned just now with kind of people with mental health issues, we adjusted ourselves to them. So we didn't do meetings that suited our schedule, but suited their schedule. And meaning like kind of every individual person. So specifically for our trans co-researcher, we had issues with onboarding. So we didn't use the same system that we used for onboarding others. We had to go through a special process that the university didn't have at that point, but it was kind of our effort to make that work. with the person who was diagnosed with ADHD. He asked if we could send him, you know, a reminder for the meeting a day ahead or notes from the meetings after, which we did, which wasn't planned at the beginning because we were just, you know, we have a group of PPI, this is what we'll do, this is kind of the standard practice, best practice. But then you go in and then you kind of have to adapt. So I would say the best thing to do is just take a very person-centered approach and allow yourself time and budget for it from the planning stage, because there will be, and you know, I mean, people might die, people might leave. We had 2 people leave, so we had to kind of reshift our structure. So just be flexible and be open to change, basically.
And I think about the power dynamics in that as well. So not mixing stakeholders in the beginning. So you might have SMEs, you might have clinicians, you might have patients, certainly in the beginning, to keep those separate so that they can all get their own agenda kind of out there and not be shouted down.
I think co-producing some of the ground rules as well, and like building that element of respect, and you know, everybody's perspective is valued and is going to be listened to as well. Full grounding any meetings that you have or any conversations that you have can be really useful in that regard as well.
I think I'd reiterate all of those things, and certainly what we found with LifeMap is being very kind of clear and transparent about, you know, how people could shape the vest and where some of those power relationships are. I think is really important, but certainly adapting, you know, how you work with people, and then also having really, really good ground rules, ideally co-produced with those people so that everybody is signed up for them, you know. So that's a way of getting everybody, you know, signed up for what you're trying to achieve, I think.
Right, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to call it a halt. We've got to get upstairs, and we've got the one-to-ones now. So we've ran over. So if anyone's got any questions, any comments, any feedback, then if they can just message us and we'll pick it up from there. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much for attending, and hopefully see you at the July event. Thanks.